All right, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about one of the most interesting and honestly, one of the most debated projects in all of crypto, the Pi network. They're making this big promise of a cryptocurrency for literally everyone, but what's really happening here? So first, you just have to wrap your head around the sheer scale of this thing. The Pi network has a community of over 60 million engaged users. No, that's not a typo. 60 million people are actively involved in this ecosystem. And to put that number into perspective, it just completely dwarfs a lot of well-known, top-tier crypto projects that are already out there. This isn't just some small niche community. It's a full-blown global movement with people in pretty much every country you can think of. Okay, but here's the multi-million-dollar question, right? For a network this gigantic, its main coin, the Pi coin, isn't something you can just go and trade on Binance or Coinbase like you would with Bitcoin or Ether. So what's the actual plan? What is this huge decentralized community building towards? To really get what Pi is all about, you've got to go back to the very beginning. The whole project was basically created to fix what their white paper calls the original sins of those first-generation cryptocurrencies. And this slide really breaks down that philosophical split. On one side, you've got Bitcoin, which needs a ridiculous amount of power and energy, and that's led to these giant centralized mining farms. And then on the other side, you've got Pi. Their entire approach is mobile-first, super low energy, and easy for anyone to access. You can literally mine it on your phone without killing your battery or needing some crazy expensive computer. So how in the world do they pull that off without your phone bursting into flames? Well, the secret sauce is an algorithm called the Stellar Consensus Protocol, or SCP. Now, instead of thinking about it like a competition to solve a math problem, think of it more like a social network for security. Instead of burning tons of energy, people on the network vouch for others they trust. And once enough of these trusted circles agree, a transaction is confirmed. It's a secure web of trust without that massive environmental price tag. So, yeah, the idea is really interesting. But how do you take this massive experiment from just a concept in a white paper to a real working network in the real world? Turns out it's a very careful step-by-step process. And you can see that whole journey laid out right here. It all started with design and distribution, then they moved to a testnet to kick the tires, and then to what they called an enclosed mainnet to test everything out in a more controlled way. Just this past February, in 2025, they officially moved into the open network phase, and they're hoping for a full mainnet launch later this year, as long as they hit all their targets. One of the huge upgrades making this next step possible is something called Protocol V23. This is a massive technical step up, bringing in the latest tech from Stellar. The simple takeaway here is that this is the engine designed to handle the insane number of transactions that 60 million plus users are going to throw at it, making sure the whole system doesn't just crash when it goes fully live. And this is where you can see how big their ambitions really are. Pi is working to become ISO 2022 compliant. Now, this is the new global standard that all the big banks and financial players use for sending messages. By getting on board with this, Pi is basically setting itself up to go head-to-head with giants like XRP and Stellar in the world of international payments. They're trying to build a bridge between the old world of finance and crypto.
But the plan for Pi is so much bigger than just being another coin you can use for payments. The team is trying to build out a whole digital ecosystem, one that's driven by real-world utility.
This quote from the founder, Dr. Chengdiao Fan, really puts their long-term goal into perspective. She's basically saying that in a world where AI is going to create incredible new wealth, the real point of blockchain is to build a new, fair way to spread that value around to everyone, not just based on who has a job. And to make all that happen, the network has a max supply of 100 billion Pi tokens. And just look at how they're split up. A whopping 80% is set aside for the community, 65% for mining rewards, 10% to help developers build on the ecosystem, and 5% for liquidity. It's all designed to get the majority of the coins into the hands of the actual users who are building and securing the whole thing. So what are you actually going to be able to do with Pi? Well, the goal is to build out this whole ecosystem they call the Pi Stack. Think of it like a decentralized app store where developers can launch new tools, which could feed into a marketplace where you can actually trade Pi for real goods and services. They're even talking about an attention marketplace to completely change how we think about monetizing online content. The whole thing is meant to be a launchpad for the next generation of AI-driven on-chain apps. But look, anytime you have a project this big, with ambitions this grand, it's not going to be a walk in the park. There are some major risks and huge challenges that they absolutely have to overcome if they're going to succeed. And this really gets to the heart of the matter. On one side, you have these incredible opportunities, a user base that's second to none, and a really unique focus on utility. But on the other side, you've got these massive hurdles, getting enough liquidity, dealing with regulations all over the world, and maybe the biggest one of all, earning the trust of major institutions. Which brings us to what might be the project's biggest elephant in the room. Pi talks a big game about decentralization, but it's gotten a lot of heat for reportedly storing sensitive user KYC, that's Know Your Customer, data on centralized servers. For a project built on the promise of decentralization, that's a really tough pill to swallow. For a lot of people in crypto, holding user data like that goes against the entire spirit of Web3. So here's the bottom line. Having 60 million users is an amazing head start, but it's not the finish line. The network's actual success is going to depend on whether it can turn that huge community into real, lasting economic activity, and whether it can earn the trust of the wider financial world. And that leaves us with the one big question that hangs over everything. With this incredible vision and a scale we've never seen before, is the Pi network actually going to make that leap from a mobile mining experiment to a genuine global financial tool? Or after all of this, is it just going to go down as crypto's biggest and most tantalizing what if?